Hi, my name is Alana Page. I am a student at Northern Vermont University, and I read this book, Critical Encounters in High School English Teaching Literary Theory to Adolescents by Deborah Appelman for my graduate seminar class in the fall of 2021. I'm going to share a little bit just about the book and quick summary kind of thing, as well as share about a critique I found of the book, and then my insights of how this is going to affect my practice and where I'm going to go next with my research project. So there's a quick overview, and let's jump right into talking about the book. So this book was recommended to me by a coworker who is our 8th grade ELA teacher. He felt this was a great, when I told him what I was looking at of best practices in ELA, this jumped to the front of his mind. He was like, you have to read this. And it has a very critical perspective of best practices in ELA. So I started reading this. This book, she spends some time kind of comparing 3 big kind of ways, or 4 ways of teaching ELA in today's classrooms. She talked about how historically great writing pieces were looked at as works of art that were handed down through generations, and that we should appreciate them, and that you shouldn't really question them. And then it moved to that teachers were the ones with all the right answers about what the author meant. And then we've moved into this kind of reader response age where we bring in that readers can read something differently, and that readers' individual perspectives affect their reading. She's arguing that we need to move to a new critical perspective where readers should be reading through different lenses. They should be taught about critique and being able to read through a feminist lens, or a race theory lens, or a Marxist lens, to help them have a better understanding of the text, and just a better understanding that there's all these different views in the world and how that should be affecting them, and that they should then be taking that skill and applying it over to themselves. So that's kind of her big argument. I do want to point out on page 141 in her book, she makes a statement that about what her goal of the book was. This book is intended not only to provide teachers with the tools they need to become more familiar with contemporary literary theory, but also to emphasize the value of multiple perspectives yielded by multiple readings of a text. So those were kind of her 2 parts of her book. She has one part where she's really arguing that this is the way reading should be taught, that students need this constructivist approach in ELA, especially when they're reading, that they need to have these lenses to be able to construct their opinions, where if they're always looking to the teacher for the answer, they don't have any of their own voice in it. But she also feels the reader response is too surface level of that, that we need to kind of be able to frame our thinking more, and that's why these different lenses of critique come in. The one thing I really enjoyed in this book was chapter 2 gave a bunch of examples of these lessons. They were just short experts of in 4 different teachers' classrooms of what this looks like. For me, I couldn't see a huge difference between what this looks like and what reader response looks like, especially when I think about bringing it down into the middle school level that I teach at. And that's kind of one of the things I've realized, is that this book, maybe it does say for high school, and I definitely think for middle school that this idea won't translate down. But was really good to read because you want to know where some teachers are going to be taking your kids in the future. So along with reading the book, I wanted to know what other people were thinking about the book, because that's what you need to do to be kind of informed and not just led down a road. So I read a critique by Micah Maddox. He has a PhD and is an associate professor at Regent University. in their English and Communication Studies department. He received his PhD from the University of Freiburg in Switzerland, as well as his master's and bachelor's at North Carolina State University. So he is American, but did his PhD and is now working in Europe. His focus is on modern and contemporary poetry, as well as in fiction and criticism. So he seemed like that he would have a good stance on being able to talk about this. So his critique really broke down into 3 big parts. First, he critiqued the layout of the novel itself, that it's broken into really 2 big sections. The chapter 1, 2, and 8 really focus on kind of the trying to persuade you. And the middle of the book focuses on each of those different lenses and how they can work in kind of teaching you that critical piece and how that can be applied into your classroom. He then talks about the problems with the presented argument. So he really dives in on her argument that all teachers have the same mindset going into it. He attacks kind of her assessment of teachers' ideology, and she's saying, the way she argues this, she puts it on the same shelf as Reader's Response and all these others. She's not really making a good argument for why this is better, and it does get muddy, the difference in between these lenses and Reader's Response, even in the example lessons she gave. Truthfully, I felt the same way as I was reading it's either the 2nd or 3rd example in chapter 2. I was like, wait, but isn't this Reader's Response not critical lenses? So I feel like it got very muddy in there, which kind of undermines her argument. And then the third problem that he sticks out is she is saying that this is the way to go, and he very quickly kind of says this isn't the only way to teach ELA. She picks certain texts and says, oh, you teach this theory with this, teach this with this, but it's not as cut and dry, and there's lots of texts that are really great texts that they don't work to teach one of these lenses that kids should be reading. And that really hit home, because I love giving my kids choice in reading, and I was like, that's true. If you're only teaching this one novel because you can teach this lens, you're taking away a lot of that student choice in their reading. And I know at the high school level, sometimes there's not as much choice, especially if you're looking at kids that are trying to get towards those AP classes. You want to make sure they're getting all of their things, getting all those books that can be on the AP list, and that they're all of that. But at the middle school level, that's not the concern. So again, I think that's one of the kind of problems between me and this book. But it did give me a lot of things to think about. Some things I found really helpful as a non-trained ELA teacher who was teaching ELA. I got to learn some different theories of teaching ELA, which I actually really needed. And I learned that myself. I love constructivist teaching that comes through my teaching. I don't love this version of constructivist teaching that she was arguing. I myself, I think I'm falling more into, I think that the reader response category is where my teaching is more going. I really think it's important that kids are learning about multiple perspectives, but I don't think, and especially at the middle school level, that they need those defined lenses. I think we can more just talk about, okay, so-and-so sees it this way and so-and-so sees it that way, and build on our own classroom experiences. Which really brings me into my application to my practice. I want to do more research on reader response. I want to bring more reader response into my everyday classes, letting kids say, this is why I think this. There was a lesson in here that I loved. They read a poem and let different kids read it out loud differently based off of where they put the emphasis in their reading. It changed the tone, and then had a wonderful discussion about the effect of where you focus, and that your own, as a reader, that's what you bring forward, and I just loved that. So I'm hoping to take that lesson and bring it forward into my classes. I also, one thing that came out to me is I think I want to let my students do some author research so they can try to decide what they thought that author's purpose was. So they can say, okay, this is what I think it means off of my response. Sharing that with peers and having those peer discussions, but also then doing some research of what's the background of the author so we can decide, okay, did they mean it how I read it or how my friend read it? I think that will be really helpful for students, because we all have been in that class where you're like, the teacher says it means this, but maybe the curtains were just blue because the curtains were blue and it didn't represent anybody's feelings at the moment. So that is where I want to take this learning from this book. In terms of my class, I want to do some further reading about reading response. And kind of make a plan to implement reading response into my 7th grade ELA classroom, along with the other steps I've been implementing into my classroom with read alouds and doing some choice novels and literature circles. So those are my next steps for my entire project, but directly from this reading of this book, I want to dive into reading response a teeny bit more. So I can really see how I can bring this to my 7th graders. Thank you so much for watching. Here's a quick bibliography of the book and the critique. And also I got some extra information about the gentleman who wrote the critique, because I wanted to make sure this critique had some backbone to it. But thank you so much for watching. I appreciate if anyone other than Dr. McGuff has to sit through this, and if it's just Dr. McGuff, thank you for watching and listening. I would love to hear some feedback.